community. And so oops,
Sorry.
no worries. One of the things that we did during that time was putting a call out to folks saying, we're opening the doors, we're closing the doors at this date. During that time, here's what we're going to go try to figure out. And if you would like to contribute, we'd love to have you. And so people like John T, who's on this call now, came over from the UK. Like he heard about the work, he took a leave of absence from his job, came for a while to contribute his talents. Folks like Toriana, who are now members of the team, but also on this call, joined as fellows. We also were having community design sessions on Thursday mornings to start, we teach human-centered design and then have them apply that work to certain projects that we were working on. And so there were lots of different ways that community was showing up. Obviously, that's had to evolve over time. We launched as a co-working space for a while. So like people were just showing up to do their own work. We were co-locating with a number of different organizations. Yeah,
Power
so there were
saws
many
were going off.
power saws were going off in the middle of meetings and spray paint inside and certain things were like, this probably won't be able to be a thing long term. But yeah, there was just really beautiful contributions that everyone brought to the table. And I think we continue to explore as an organization grows and matures, how do we continue to not have such tall walls. A lot of organizations, it feels like there's very tall walls. Like it's hard. You're either inside or you're outside. And so how do we create more permeable boundaries to allow people to come in and contribute in the ways that feel good to them?
Yeah, and that might be one of the advantages of going with a vision over a strategy. Um, we were able to paint a picture that we wanted to move towards, but it was expansive enough that a lot of people could see themselves in it. And Mike always used to say we ought to be the great inviter. And a key part of, you mentioned the word courage, Elena. I don't really remember courage in me. I remember, maybe it's just because I've blanked it out over time. I remember a lot of fun and I remember a lot of conviction. And I think those two experiences were really closely linked to people raising their hand and showing up and saying, I want to be a part of this conversation, or I think I can help, or I want to hear more, I want to get involved some way. And I think it was those individuals and it was early team that had us, to Julia's point, just figuring out what's the next step. Like, given where we are now, what's the next best thing that we can do? And I would wish for everybody in their professional experience or their creative experience to have memories like I know we all share of a big expansive vision, people popping up to contribute, and enough faith and trust in one another that you say, I don't know what the next call we have to make is going to be, but I trust that we can figure it out together. And that thread has felt consistent, I think, at the beginning, the middle, and to present day, where we're still looking at all these different opportunities and challenges in front of us, and and calls that have to be made, the likes of which we've never made before. But we still garner strength looking around at all these people that are contributing to this mission and feeling strong in one another to at least make the best next call that we got to make.
One thing I would just build on that, courage got referenced, but I think the biggest asset was trust. And it's not like that just, you go to the local grocery store and you go down the aisle of trust and you throw it in the basket and you got it. I mean, we went through many, many things and hard things, but we kept coming back to, we knew that we were waking up to go steward this mission. And we knew that that mission was needed in our country, in our community, in our city. And and that the best way that we could possibly steward that mission is if we carried a strong trust among ourselves so that we could go take the risks that often don't get taken, because there isn't the belief or the faith in each other.
Yeah, and a big one there, I would say, Mike, was the trust with our partners. So like for folks on this call, like Crystal and John and Sean, like
Sean,
it took a lot of courage to step forward with Civilla to approach work in a different way because it was just really antithetical to the way that work typically gets done inside of institutions. And without that courage and without that trust in the partnership, there's no way that this work would get done. It still takes a lot of courage to do it, but especially in those early days when human-centered design and this way of working was really not being widely discussed inside of government, I have just like so much appreciation for those early partners who were willing to Julia, to your point, like take a bet on like I don't know how to fix this problem, I don't know how to solve this, but we're gonna figure it out together, linking arms and just going. So that's been amazing to find folks inside of government with that much courage.
I think it's courage, and there's an optimism that has to be inherent to it, right? It can't just be like courage. It also, like, I don't know what the solution is, but we're going to try. But it also has to be a belief that it can be better. And I think that's one of the things that I think remains true about Civilla is that there's an optimism that it can be better.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that really resonated for me as someone who was first introduced as a government leader to Civilla. It was just this optimism that existed.
Yeah.
Some of the finest leaders that I ever worked with over 40 years, this is all industry, are those that are deeply committed within these public serving institutions. They're often invisible, they're not known, they'll never be on a Fast Company magazine or anything like that. But really beautiful, dedicated folks that wake up, they want to go do the right thing. And but sometimes they don't have an outside ally. They don't have someone that says, we'll go take that jump with you, and we were fortunate to find early on and continuing today individuals that could see that and were willing to go take the leap.
As a leader, maybe in a government institution that wants to take a leap or does have the optimism, but may not feel like they have like the support, what is a practical step that you all have seen from working with leaders that they could take to start their own project or really push an idea forward to change something within their institutions?
There's a few things I would lift up, and then I'm curious, Julia and Mike and Adam, what you would say. I think for us, we've seen the power of starting with one small but really important step, like not trying to boil the ocean and change everything all at once, but saying like, within the environment that I'm currently in, what's one thing that is mission critical to the organization, but if we could improve it, would start to have this ripple effect. We call those key dominoes. And we've found it is just like really powerful when you get focused on a specific starting point like that. Because it can help create some cover, right? You don't have to bring the entire organization along from the beginning, but you build a small team around it that really believes in what you're doing. And B, when you do get the change made there, because it's an important kind of critical touch point for the organization, people start to pay attention and they start to talk about it and they start to want to say, how do we go do this the way we did that? And so it starts to that approach starts to sell itself, and you start to get people raising their hand and wanting to be a part of it and wanting to join. And then, Julia, I'm curious your thoughts too on just how to not go it alone. There's a lot of, whether it's within agencies, often there's a lot of silos that cause leaders to feel lonely, but also across agencies, like there's a lot of folks sitting there having the same experience, but not necessarily feeling connected to one another. And where we have found a lot of energy is, helping to create more of those connections, because there's a lot of wisdom and strength that can be garnered there. But I'm curious your thoughts, Julia, on how you experienced that in your roles.
Yeah, I think, Lena, you're right on and not going it alone. And I think it's so important to have both internal folks that are going to walk with you as well as partners like Civilla. One of the things that I would say is like, look for the people who have that optimism, who have maybe a hunger and a belief that things can and should be better. It's okay to not have the solution. It's actually better. I think we've all seen to not have a solution already in mind, but to have people that are willing to say, I think we can do something about this. And I think if you can find people who have that level of like they care about the mission of the organization, but they also believe like we can do this better or we can do more. And I think the other thing is that it's really easy in these roles within government to get caught up in the doing. Like you get into that role and you just have to move, right? Things have to happen, calls have to be made, decisions have to be made, but you have to carve out time to have these conversations, to have the opportunity to problem solve, to ideate, to think about what could be, because we can get so caught up in the doing, in the moving of pieces, that you don't actually make space for problem solving. And I think that's what stands out to me is coming to Civilla for the first time, coming to the studio and it feeling like oxygen, right? Like taking a breath in the space. I remember our team, a member of our team, as I was at UIA and we would come to Civilla, she would say to me, coming to Civilla felt like going to good therapy. There was something different. Like there was space to breathe and to think and to process. And like just making that margin and that space is so important for leaders wherever they are.
Not licensed.
No need to lay down on the couch.
Yeah. There's
There are couches.
there's another
There
refrain
are couches.
yeah, we do. True. There's another refrain that we've often returned to with leaders who are asking that question, Elena. And it gets to the core of when we use a term like human-centered design, what we mean. And those questions relate to asking leaders to get really clear about who their user is and what of their users' needs do they feel they're able to advocate for or champion. And what can happen in organizational life and in complex institutions is that layers upon layers of problems start stacking up, and the needs of the institution related to its own affairs and operations, related to its own strategic goals and so forth, can supplant the role of the user, the role of the end user. And what we've oftentimes encouraged leaders to do is to try and set aside even just an hour or two to go and have conversations directly with those who their organizations exist to serve. And that can be the start of a thread that you can pull for many years. But without that first step, it's very difficult to get into the conversation about human-centered design. And so sometimes that first step is the hardest. I know we've encouraged a lot of leaders to take that step and then have never heard from them again. So I get that. But when you can find a leader who's willing to set aside some of their own knowledge and assumption about expertise in favor of some deep listening and some earnest questions, we find often that can start to reorient not only their strategy or sort of their intellectual framing of an organization's strategy, but it can also impact their heart and their soul and their spirit as a guiding reminder of why they and their colleagues are in the work in the first place. One of the most common questions that comes when you give a leader that push is, well, how would we find people? Or like, who could we talk to? And that seems to be one of the major stumbling blocks. Fortunately, in the domains that we work in, that oftentimes are serving hundreds of thousands or millions of people, there are answers. There are people out there that interact with these organizations, oftentimes under the right circumstances, that would be willing to have a conversation about it. But that's a really good place to start, I think.
I think, Adam, just to your point too, there is something powerful when you're looking another person in the eyes and learning and hearing about their story and their experience. There's just something you can't avoid when you do that.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things, though, getting to that first step, that I carry forever gratitude, both to the team that's on the screen and those online and those in the space. But it was a moment with our board, very early board meeting, and we had like 8 different things we were on, and we were talking about it all. And we had the board say to us, Ken is on the board, sitting with Adam, Cynthia's online here out in New York. And we had the push that scrap 7 of those 8 things and focus on one. Like focus. Because if you get that done, and this happened to be around the application in the state of Michigan on a redesign, if you get that done, something will have happened that really hasn't happened anywhere in the United States, and it's worth that risk. So we bet the whole farm on it, right? And the reason that's important for this first step is we really did not see momentum occur until we could point to something that in fact got across the finish line. And for leaders who are under huge stress, limited resources, high volume and velocity, stakeholder demands, they do need to know that this change is possible this way. And it was that strong push from our board to say, focus, go deep, get it across the finish line, because that will help give the courage to leaders who, among a million things, they do need to know that there's a shot, there's a chance. And that ended up being the central piece. And then to Lena is like, and can you focus it? Don't go try. Don't too long. I've seen orgs and leaders go too wide, too fast, and it's really just saying, can you get it down to a size of a thing that you can explain it and people can understand it? Start there.
That's good. Julia, when you were talking, you talked about how when you went into the Civilla space, it gave you oxygen. And I'm curious to know for you all how space has played a part in your Civilla story and the way that you've done storytelling and gotten leaders on board. And again, wanting to make it very practical, are there ways that we can also think about it in our own work, thinking about space?
I'll just say the civil, for anyone on here who's a state worker, has been in a state space, or a federal worker, a government worker of any sort, like government workspaces have a certain feel to them, right? You're either in cubicles or offices, the buildings all tend to have a certain feel and look to them. And one of the things that just really stood out to me was just how open it was in the room. I think we go through a lot of our life trying to make ourselves smaller, oftentimes physically, and not take up as much space. And when you walk into Civilla, there's this expansive feel, right? There's space for everyone. There's space to breathe. There is space to move, and there is space to think. And even when you look at where our teams sit, that right there is space to spread out and to think. And just even from a basic operations, that does something to the body and to the mind when you walk in to a space compared to how I'd spent, more than 20 years of my career working in. It's just a creativity and a freedom that is allowed.
Yeah, I was gonna say that too, Julia. Like an abundance of space, I think, can be a really powerful thing. When we took on the space at Civilla, we started in a storage closet, which is about, I think, 5,000 or 6,000 square feet. We were still a team of technically 3 people when we took on the additional space next to us. So we had about 10,000 square feet of space for 3 people, which seemed like a very
and no clients.
yeah, no, it seemed like a very irrational way to spend to put resources in the early days. But honestly, it has been one of the most important or a very important lever, both culturally for the team, but also for the work, like the ability to build, the ability to your point, Julia, show up, the ability to experiment, the ability to gather, all of that has been really critical. And, you know, especially post-COVID, obviously a lot of work has moved remote, research has moved remote, client meetings have moved remote. We even are remote a few days a week, a couple days a week. But I think there is still a really important need for people to come together, for people to be in community with one another, for people to create and dream. And so we're paying a lot of attention to that right now, and continuing to, I think, in that openness, also try to create space for the team to make the space their own in the ways that are reasonable. That's changed over time. You know, the space has to be a little bit more fixed now in order for it to accommodate as many people as we have on the team. But in the early days, there was really very little that was kind of centralized and determined about the space. Like people who came in knew, like, I can make the space my own. They could build their own desks. They could, you know, we had materials in the space for people to be able to make it what they needed. And there was beautiful things that came from that. So where you can identify both an abundance of space to bring people together and also help them make it their own, just really beautiful things follow.
One thing I learned about space from a mentor of mine was too often space gets designed as employee storage units. You know, it's like a way to go house that instead of it being a strategic tool to move the mission. And if you begin to think about space as a strategic tool, that there's so few that you can actually hold and utilize as leaders of an institution. Space is one of those. And it gets undervalued as a way to drive mission. You know, it's much more thought of how do we handle the function of kind of an employee storage unit system type of thing instead of a mission accelerator.
Mhm.
I have to be careful on this topic because I'm liable to go on a diatribe about it. I'll limit that on this call. I will say that a digital space for us is the only reason that we can have this conversation with this group today. And I'm super grateful for all of the flexibility and access that these digital spaces create, full stop. I also think in that a lot of the affordances of being in person together increasingly get written off as non-essential. And those are really difficult arguments to push back upon because these tools are just so convenient. But I am 100% confident that Civilla's mission would not be where it is right now without the role of people being together in person. Um, Sometimes, in spite of it being difficult to gather, um, maybe sometimes because of it. And yeah, I always just find myself encouraging people to differentiate between you all are about 3-inch two-dimensional replications of yourself in my world right now. It would be different if you were right next to me. And when it comes to collaboration, when it comes to advocating, when it comes to storytelling, when it comes to making decisions as a group, those differences can be really material. And Civilla stood tall for that for a decade now.
Has welcomed over 6,000 people to the space.
Oh, I think it's much more than
More
that,
than
but I
that?
can't
There used to be a
say for
clicker.
sure.
So I'm looking in the chat and Brian asked a question. This is a heavy question, so not jealous of you all answering it, but what work are you most proud of that has been accomplished at Civilla? So curious to know, is there something that has stood out to you, a moment, a conversation, an experience?
I can start. I'm most proud that there's an organization that has low bullshit,
Mike.
that is deeply rooted in purpose and principles in a real way, not fiction, not just up on the wall, that it's rooted around real relationships on real work that is striving for real impact. But that at the end of the day, it is around advancing that mission, like in an authentic way, not in fiction, not in like we're coming just we're coming to an interesting space with an interesting group to do interesting work. It is a group around a shared purpose that's rooted in a set of principles. And I'll tell you, in 40 years, that's hard to do. And I think that's the thing I'm most proud of. And that it created an environment to let people grow in magical ways. You know, it was a place, and it is a place to be in order to bring a fuller expression of who you are.
I love that, Mike. Yeah, I think that's an aspect of the work we don't talk as much about publicly, but you know, we still view Civilla as its own design project, right? Like it is, we have the work we go do with our partners, and we also view the organization as its own design project, and have been prototyping kind of all the way along. So I'm really proud of that. I think a moment that came to mind, Elena, when you asked that question, and Dana, I think this gets to the question you just asked. But there's like so many proud moments when I think about the work over the last decade. I think one that like I truly will never forget was on January 22nd, 2018, which was like Mike, you mentioned, we bet the farm on one project, which was redesigning the benefits application in Michigan. And that was the date it rolled out, which was significant for us. But the most, like the moment I will never forget was there was someone who joined us that day whose name was Dr. Latina Denson, and she had been the very first person that Mike and I had interviewed as part of that project. We visited her in her home, heard her story, and the many years long struggle with applying for benefits in Michigan. And she became a really, I mean, she's become a deep friend to the organization, but also contributed like hugely to that work all the way throughout that process. And on the day that it launched in Michigan, she came and visited the office where where her caseworker was based. And she ended up gathering the staff of that office and addressing them in that moment in order to tell a part of her story, as well as to just mark the moment of this thing that she had contributed so hugely, had struggled with and contributed so hugely to being different in the world for her and for many, many of her community members. And it was such a powerful moment watching those caseworkers and those office managers, listen to her and celebrate with her, and that coming together of like the institutional lens and the community lens, both working towards the same thing, was what, you know, is just so emblematic of what Civil is in the world to do. So yeah, I'll never forget that day, and still remain just really, hugely proud of that work, and of the team that's continued that work since then.
Amen.
Adam, what about you?
Well, that's a hard one to top.
Might as well go on to the next question.
I might zoom out just a little bit and say, I am really proud of the spirit with which this organization was founded. And I'm really proud of the way that this organization continues to mature and to develop and to unfold. And I love being able to walk through the organization and see elements of that same spirit of vision and enthusiasm and boldness that was so present in the first chapter. And you can still see that on the team and in the space. And I love seeing these capabilities that have emerged and this breadth of perspective and capacity that was would have been very hard to imagine early on. I view this organization as a best case scenario for what was originally conceived. And that is for any organization 10 years in, that's a low probability outcome. But I think I would have great concern if it felt overly rigid, like it anchored to one early success and then never could move beyond that. I think I'd feel maybe sad if I no longer felt like I could recognize what it is. Um, to me, this organization reflects just the best of what we've picked up along the way. And that makes me really genuinely optimistic and curious and excited about the next 10 years because I feel such conviction that when we're having the same version of this conversation in 10 years and everyone's a little holograph instead of a Zoom square, um, that there will be even more texture to, wow, this aspect of the organization, that ritual has only deepened and deepened and deepened now for 20 years. And then this aspect of the organization has become something that none of us ever contemplated it being. And that is, it's some of the fun of being in the same organization for 10 years. It's also something I'm really proud of. And that is mostly a reflection of the team and the ways that they have deepened certain practices and the way that they have stretched certain practices.
One thing I would just add on that, the fact that Civilla isn't any one person. Like many have their fingerprints on it, and that was required all the way through, I think is one of the real beautiful expressions of it, you know. It's not named after anybody, it's named after a much bigger idea that everyone could put their fingerprints on, and that was needed. And I think that's one of the very, very special things about it is it's just isn't a one person entity, you know, or focus. It is the collective. That's a real power.
Mm. Love those stories. Some of those in the chat were saying, I've never heard this story. So thank you so much for sharing that. When you're thinking about the next 10 years and you're reflecting on just the past 10 years, there obviously has been so much change. And, with change, I've heard you all have said sometimes there is necessary friction that happens with that. How have you all navigated change as the organization has evolved? And what is maybe some advice for someone else who may be in their season of navigating their own change within their organization?
I don't know if I'm like if this is a marker of maybe something's a little off with me, but I like change. Um, I've always felt that, change is an opportunity for growth. It doesn't mean that it's easy. It doesn't mean that it's comfortable. But to me, like the opportunity to learn and to stretch and to grow. And if we don't find ourselves uncomfortable, at times I would question that. Yeah, there are so many times where I've seen people go into new roles and they'll say, well, this is hard, or it's not like it was before. It's not like it was at my, wherever I was before. And that's normal whenever we make a shift, right? There's new norms and there's new people and relationships and organizational culture. And in my mind, yes, that can be really uncomfortable and it can be sticky sometimes or prickly even. But to me, like that's growth. Like all of that is opportunity for growth and for learning. And if you have a willingness to be even just a little bit uncomfortable, I think the opportunity that is before you is just limitless. And so I would just caution anyone out there who's in a season of change that just because something is uncomfortable doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It could just be a growing and a stretching and a learning season.
You know, I think there's, I once heard the line that someone's saying, I'm all for change as long as it's happening to somebody else, you know. And there's probably some truth in that, you know. It's like I'm all for it, but you know, not so much me. Um, I think with Civilla, one thing that's helpful from the very early on, we began to root ourselves in the rhythms and some of the teachings of nature. We run the organization by seasons, right? And that plays a role. And one of the clear things that nature teaches us is you have to adapt, you know, because the external environment is always going to be changing. And so, you know, since the time we've seen obviously elections, we've seen pandemics, we've seen business cycles, new folks coming into leadership roles with key partners and all that. And generally of just saying instead of that being a setback, it's an opportunity for us to adapt, learn how nature adapts for it. And one thing that has helped us through that is a deep root in our principles and a really core rhythm and rituals to the organization that keep us grounded, you know, and not get too much of blowing in the wind in terms of what that external environment is doing, so that we can make the best possible decisions on how might we adapt in this moment at this time that will serve this mission.
Good. So as we're nearing towards the end, I can't believe this conversation has already flown by. For each of you, I want to end with asking a question of what are you looking forward to or having hope for the next 10 years? This could be maybe in your own work, this could be maybe in the future of design and public service, but as you maybe have been reflecting this month, what is something that you're looking forward to?
I think one of the things I'm looking forward to is until I interacted with Civilla as the UIA director, I never had a language. I had never heard of human-centered design. I had thoughts and I had feelings and I had observations, but it was my first exposure, you know, over 3 years ago to the language of it. And I have seen across government like that awareness and exposure continue to grow. And what I hope to see is that it's not just an awareness, but it's an embracing of the idea of putting the people that we serve first and their experiences first. And that doesn't become the exception in government. In public serving institutions, like that becomes the norm, that this should be the expectation. And not only should it be the expectation, but that we should be able to put it in place with excellence.
I think related to that, Julia, I'm thinking about just the arrival of that mentality inside of institutions and the embracing of human-centered design. And it's arrived actually a lot faster, I think, than we had ever anticipated when we started the organization, which has been really thrilling to watch. And it creates this opportunity. It makes me really excited to think about how to, look in the next 10 years, looking back, would love to just see this future where organizations have the capacity to do this work within themselves, right? Like they have the permission to do that, they have the skills to do that, they have the air cover to do that. We want to be a part of helping that happen. But yeah, as an organization, we've always aspired to remain small, in part cultural and in part because it forces a really helpful question, which is if you're not going to go do all the work yourselves, you have to then build capacity inside of institutions in a different way. And how might we partner with them to do that? So I don't know how we do that. It's a big question, but I'm really excited to see, yeah, just the trajectory that's happening inside of institutions around that, the embracing of it, and would love to just see a lot more practitioners doing that work from the inside.
Go, Adam.
I think most people I'm listening to anticipate the next 10 years, there's going to be a ton of change almost everywhere you look. This relates back to your prior question a little bit. And several of those voices are really dreading those changes, or they're really nervous about what they're going to mean socially or technologically or wherever you look. I've been pushing myself to really contemplate beautiful outcomes amidst it all. And I'm hopeful that all sorts of things that felt rigid and stuck, things that weren't working well for anybody over these next 10 years become unstuck and more flexible or more adaptive than we could even imagine right now. And I'm confident that Civilla is going to be championing that pathway, a beautiful civil society for all.
You know, maybe this is the troublemaker in me, but where my mind first went was Civilla can be an organization that takes on challenges that really scare us, meaning like we bet the farm, like we take the risk. We've always viewed it as a prototype. We don't view we're building a legacy. We're trying to work on something that just really has genuine impact. And I think that will continue to ask us to be on hard, difficult, courageous decisions that we got to go bet the farm. You know, in some cases, it could be, boy, we're known around this, but what we really feel is most needed, where we could uniquely play that role, is we got to go put our chips here. And that what I look forward to is I have the confidence that Civilla will be that organization that is willing to take that courage, take that risk, and be okay that it might not work out. But I said to the team one day, if we all gathered in the dream cocoon, we have a dream cocoon at Civilla, and everything fell apart, and I was standing there with our teammates, our 25 teammates, I have 100% confident that we would find our way to go make meaningful impact, even if everything had just imploded. And if you can come through the door having that confidence and faith in each other, then I think it demands that we stay bold, we stay courageous, and we take risks. And that's what I look forward to. And a little bit of trouble, hopefully.
Maybe a lot of it.
Maybe a lot. Wow, thank you all so much. There's a ritual that we do at Civilla where at the end of the day we call it a checkout. And during our checkout, we like to end with one word. And so for you all, I'm gonna go around and ask, like, what is your one word that comes up when summing up this time together? And then for everyone who's visiting in the chat, please leave your one word before you leave. So Julia, let's kick it off with you.
Optimism.
Mike.
Faith.
Adam.
Bold.
Lena.
Possible.
And mine would be journey.
I think we should ask Ken in there what his word.
Ken, what's your one word?
wildly excited. I get 2 words. 'Cause
Me too.
love it is.
I love looking at all the words that you all are leaving in the chat. Thank y'all so much for just joining us. Please continue to follow us for all the Civilla Chats we will bring to you. And happy birthday, Civilla.
Aw. As
Thank
Coriana
you.
says,
Thank you.
preteen.
Yeah.
And thank you all for joining from near and far. Means a lot to
Yeah,
us.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
So fun to see everyone here.
Yes. Okay, well, we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye, all.
Bye.